The wind had teeth that morning. Sharp and snapping, it lifted the edge of Samuel Kerrigan's coat and slipped cold fingers through the torn lining. He didn't bother fixing it, the lining or the wind. Both had been coming undone for longer than he could manage, and both he figured were beyond mending. He stood just outside the train depot, boots sunk ankle-deep in dry dust and shattered gravel. One of the few structures still standing since the cattle line pulled out of the territory. The rest of the town was all ghost-colored bleached bone by the sun and stripped raw by the wind. Samuel shifted his weight. The left side of his ribs bit at him, same place the bull had thrown him back in July, and the old injury flared whenever he breathed too deep or stood too long. Today it throbbed. He let it. His hat was pulled low, but the sun still cut down like a branding iron, flattening everything it touched. The air smelled of alkali and horse sweat. Further out, vultures circled. Behind him, the depot doors creaked open. He didn't turn. The voice was small, dry, like paper left too long in the sun. "Sir, please take my sister." Samuel blinked. He turned slow, unsure what kind of ghost would speak that way. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. Filthy shirt, half-buttoned collarbone jutting out sharp as fence-wire arms tight around a sack that looked heavier than him. His face was red with windburn and dust, his hair a tangled blonde mop. Behind him, leaning against the depot wall, sat a girl maybe 15, 16 at most, holding a baby to her chest. No tears, no words, just the stillness of someone who'd had nothing left to give for a long, long time. Samuel took a step closer, then stopped. He'd seen that look before, at the tail end of the war, in boys who watched their fathers get buried in ditches and knew no one was coming back. He'd seen it in the mirror more than once when liquor couldn't scrape out the ache inside. "You got a name?" he asked the boy. The boy swallowed hard, looked past him. "Clem. My sister's name's Annie, and that's Ella." He nodded at the bundle in Annie's arms. "How long you been out here?" Clem shrugged. "Train let us off yester evening. Mama died last week. Papa before that. Conductor said we had kin west of here. Dropped us at the station and said someone take us. No one's come." Samuel didn't answer right away. His jaw worked a moment before he spoke. "There ain't much west of here." Clem nodded, eyes shining, but his voice stayed flat. "We know." Samuel looked at the girl again. Annie. Her face was sunburnt and her eyes dark and dull, didn't blink when he met them. The baby at her chest made a small sound, not quite a cry. A breath. A whisper. He cursed under his breath. "You got any other folks?" he asked. Clem shook his head. "No, sir." "And what makes you think I'd take your sister?" Clem didn't hesitate. "You look like you'd care. Even if you don't want to." Samuel felt the words hit low in his gut. The boy hadn't said it to flatter. It wasn't a plea. Just truth, the way children said things when they'd seen too much too soon. He closed his eyes for a second. "I ain't got much," he said. "I got a shack near the river. Some land. A few cows that ain't dropped dead yet. That's all." Clem looked back at Annie, then up at Samuel. "It's more than we got." The baby fussed, and Annie finally moved, shifted her weight, and looked up at Samuel like she was seeing him for the first time. There wasn't desperation in her face. No hope either. Just that empty kind of waiting that comes when nothing else makes sense. Samuel nodded once, sharp and final. "Come on then." And when Clem stumbled forward, trying to lift the sack and call to his sister, all at once something cracked inside Samuel's chest. Not loud, just a quiet breaking. He stepped forward, took the sack, and slung it over his shoulder. Then he bent down, voice low, rough as gravel. "You can ride up front with me, son. Your sister and the little one, they'll take the wagon bed." Clem nodded, and for the first time he let the tears come. He didn't sob, didn't fall, just stood there shaking in the dust, face wet and silent as the wind blew on, indifferent as ever. Samuel watched him, then turned toward the wagon without another word. The wagon was nothing much. Paint, long gone boards, cracked, one wheel bent just enough to favor the left side of the road. But it still moved when coaxed, and Samuel figured that was all a man had any right to ask for. He helped Annie into the back, her arms wrapped tight around the baby. She said nothing, not even when the jolt of the wagon bed made the child whimper. She settled on a folded wool blanket, thin as paper, and sat still, legs tucked up beneath her. Her eyes never left the road ahead, though Samuel doubted she was seeing it. Clem climbed up beside Samuel, fingers clamped on the edge of the seat like he expected to be thrown. Samuel handed him a tin cup filled with water and let the boy drink it dry before clicking the reins. The mules pulled slow. They always did. Dust climbed in long, lazy curls behind them, stretching back toward the depot, and that dead, dry stretch of track that hadn't seen a train stop long enough for breath in weeks. They didn't speak much. Samuel wasn't good at it, and the boy looked too worn to try. Instead, they listened to the creak of wood, the shuffle of hooves, and the far-off call of hawks chasing something small. An hour passed, maybe two. It wasn't until the wagon dipped near the river bend that Clem broke the silence. His voice was thin and cracked like wind through old paper. "Was your mama good?" Samuel blinked. He didn't answer right away. Let the reins hang slack in his hands and stared out over the brittle brush and the low crawl of water below. "She died when I was little," he said at last. "But I remember her hands. They were always warm, always moving, sewing, stirring, holding on." Clem was quiet for a moment. "Our mama smelled like lye soap and apples, even when we didn't have apples no more." Samuel nodded. He felt something tighten in his throat but didn't name it. He'd grown good at not naming things. "Was she sick?" he asked. Clem nodded. "Caught a fever after Papa went. Annie did everything. Washed her, fed her, stayed up 3 nights straight." A pause. "She held Mama's hand when she died. I watched from the corner. Annie told me to sing quiet so the baby wouldn't cry." Samuel swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said. The boy didn't answer. He didn't have to. They rode on. By the time the cabin came into view, the sky had started bleeding pink across the western rim. Long shadows stretched from the cottonwoods near the creek, and the wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. The place wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a lean-to with busted hinges, but the porch held, and the chimney, crooked as it was, still drew smoke when the fire burned hot enough. Samuel climbed down first, then helped Clem and Annie. He didn't rush them. The girl moved like someone not sure the ground would hold. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with dust and the smell of old cedar. Samuel stirred the fire back to life and set water to boil while Clem explored every corner with his wide, quiet eyes. Annie laid the baby down in a basket he'd once used for kindling. She tucked the blanket in with care and smoothed the child's hair with fingers too thin, too still. "Her name's Ella," she said, the first word she'd spoken since the depot. Her voice was soft, low, like a hymn sung from memory. Samuel nodded. "She's got her mama's eyes," he said. Annie didn't correct him. Later, after the bread had been warmed and the broth ladled into chipped bowls, they sat in silence again. Clem curled up on a straw mattress near the hearth, fast asleep with his thumb near his mouth and his brow still furrowed. Samuel stepped out onto the porch. The stars had come out slow and steady like they had all the time in the world. Annie joined him, baby still against her chest. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "We won't be a burden?" Samuel didn't answer right away. The night was too quiet, too wide for quick words. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded piece of canvas, and laid it over the porch rail. Inside was an old photograph, faded and curled at the edges. A woman with dark eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. She held a baby. That baby had died before it ever spoke a word. "She's buried out back," he said. "And the woman she left couldn't bear it. Never wrote." Annie looked at the photo, then out toward the stretch of land behind the house. "I'm sorry," she said. He shook his head. "Don't be." The wind stirred again, lifting a strand of her hair. The baby made a soft, suckling noise in sleep. "You can stay as long as you need," Samuel said. And in the dark, under a sky too wide to hold anything back, Annie whispered, "Thank you." Not like someone owed him anything, but like someone choosing for the first time in weeks to believe she might still be safe. Subscribe and keep walking into the unknown. The days came dry and clear, one after the next, stitched together by dust and chores, and the small, unnoticed sounds of survival. Morning meant hauling water from the creek. Mornings also meant Ella's cries, soft at first, then rising until Annie could no longer ignore the cold in the room, and rose without complaint. Samuel built the fire before the sun showed its full face. He did it quietly, as if afraid sound might scare them off. Clem took to feeding the chickens, though there weren't many left and none had laid in days. He chased them around with his sleeves rolled up and a determination that didn't quite match his scrawny frame. It was Annie who surprised him most. She never once asked what the rules were. She found them, quietly, without needing a word from him. She cleaned the hearth without being asked. She swept dust from the corners with a bundled cedar branch. When the clothesline sagged and snapped under the weight of damp blankets, she fixed it with twine and a piece of split rail. She didn't flinch from the work, even when her hands blistered, even when Ella fussed and the sun beat down cruel on her bare neck. Sometimes Samuel watched her from the field, the way she moved, measured, careful, like she'd break if she rushed. Or maybe the world would. One afternoon, after mending fence posts all morning, Samuel came up the slope and saw Annie out by the ash tree, hammering something against the stump. Turned out to be a bent horseshoe and a long iron nail. She was fashioning a hook for the cabin wall. When she noticed him, she didn't startle, just wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist and said, "Baby's clothes have nowhere to dry." Samuel offered her water from his canteen. She took it, drank, not greedily, just enough. "I had a sister once," Samuel said. The words came before he thought them through. "She drowned in the Cimarron." Annie looked up. Her face didn't shift much, but her voice, when it came, was softer than it had been. "How old?" "10." She nodded. "I was 9 when Mama died." She went fast. It was Papa who took too long. They stood there, words done, just the hush of grass and wind rising between them. Later that evening they shelled beans by lantern light. Clem leaned against the doorframe, already half asleep. Annie asked, "Did you ever want children?" Samuel didn't move. "I did," he said. "I still do, I think." He looked at the girl, the baby asleep beside her in the wash basin lined with quilts. "It's strange, ain't it?" he said. "You can lose everything and still want." Annie didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her eyes had that same faraway pull. "You?" he asked, quieter now. She nodded. "I want Ella to grow up knowing people don't always leave." The words hit him in the chest like a quiet gunshot. No dramatics, no pleading, just a line drawn in the dirt, true as anything he'd ever heard. He stood across the room and gently pulled the stovepipe damper closed. "Best get to bed. Wind's gonna shift cold tonight." She rose, gathered the baby, and paused at the doorway to the back room. "Good night, Samuel." He looked at her, really looked, and in her face there was something more than sorrow, something beginning to take root. "Good night, Annie." When the door clicked shut behind her, the room felt different. Not full, not warm, but not so empty anymore. Samuel sat a while longer, listening to the fire crackle, the wind rubbing the eaves, and from behind the thin wall the slow, even breath of someone learning how to rest again. A week passed, then two. The days fell into rhythm, slow, quiet, and full of the kind of work that didn't allow for much talking. Fences needed mending. The mule needed shoeing. A storm had come through and left branches scattered like bones across the back pasture. Annie took to mending clothes in the evenings. She sat in the same chair by the fire each night, thread looped through a needle, her fingers moving like they'd done it 1,000 times. Sometimes she hummed just low and steady under her breath. Nothing recognizable, but it settled the baby and sometimes even Samuel, though he never said so. Clem started asking questions. He wanted to know the names of every tree, every bird, every part of the wagon. He followed Samuel in the fields, mimicking the way he tied rope or tossed hay. Samuel found himself answering without thinking, pointing things out with a quiet patience he didn't know he still had. One evening, while they were trimming the overgrown brush near the chicken coop, Clem asked, "Did you ever fight?" Samuel didn't look up. "In the war." The boy nodded. Yeah. Was it bad?" Samuel paused. He looked at Clem, this skinny boy with his feet too big for his boots and dirt under every nail. "Worse than bad," he said. "It's not like the stories. It's not brave. It's just men breaking." Clem was quiet after that, and Samuel was glad. The next day, the stranger came. It was late morning. Samuel was chopping firewood out back when he heard the creak of wagon wheels. Not his. Lighter. Newer. He rounded the corner and saw a man stepping down from a painted buggy. Sharp suit, black hat, thin mustache that didn't quite hide the sneer on his face. Annie stood in the doorway with Ella in her arms. She looked calm, but her body had gone stiff. Samuel could see it even from where he stood. The man tipped his hat. "Name's Merritt Hanley," he said. Annie's uncle on her mama's side. Samuel's jaw tightened. "You ain't come for them," he said flatly. Merritt looked surprised, then grinned. "I came for the girl," he said, gesturing toward Annie. "We heard about her being dropped out here. My wife was real upset about it. Family's family. She's safe here." Merritt stepped forward, casual, like the way snakes move. "No one's doubting that. But she's young. Pretty. Ain't right for her to be out here with no chaperone. Got a house. Room to spare. We'd raise the baby right." Annie didn't speak. She just stared, face pale, lips pressed into a tight line. Samuel took a step forward, axe still in hand. "Didn't come for Clem." Merritt glanced toward the boy who was peeking from around the corner of the cabin. "He ain't blood," he said. "Different father. Not our concern." Samuel turned to Annie. "You want to go with him?" She looked at Merritt, then at Samuel, then down at Ella. "No," she said, quiet but steady. "He's lying. He wants a servant. That's all I ever was." Merritt's face twisted. "You ungrateful little—" Samuel stepped between them. "You should leave," he said. "This ain't your business." "It is now." Merritt looked at him like he was trying to size up a man who didn't quite fit the measurements. Then he spit in the dirt. "She'll regret this." Samuel didn't move. "She already did. That's why she's here." Merritt climbed back into the buggy, jaw set hard, and whipped the reins. The horse turned wheels, spinning up dust as he left. Annie stood still for a long time after he disappeared over the hill. Samuel didn't touch her, didn't say much, just waited. Finally she turned to him. "Thank you. You don't owe me that." "I do," she said. Samuel shook his head. "You stood your ground. That was all you." She looked down at Ella, then back at him. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. He used to tell me I had nowhere else to go. You do now." A long silence stretched between them. The wind picked up, pulling the last of the dead leaves from the cottonwood. "Samuel," she said, voice low, "why'd you really let us stay?" He looked away. The sky had turned the color of split slate, and the fields smelled of coming rain. "Because I knew what it looked like to be left behind," he said, "and I was tired of pretending I was fine with it." Annie stepped closer. Her free hand brushed against his sleeve. Just once. Inside, the baby stirred. Clem came out to feed the chickens. The world, such as it was, kept turning. But Samuel felt it. That shift. Something had taken root. Something small and stubborn. By early March, the hard freeze had eased its grip. The earth, brittle and stubborn through winter, had softened under the pale weight of spring. Shoots of green pushed up through the dirt like quiet promises, and the creek ran faster, carrying melted snow from the mountain edges. Samuel found Annie out near the fence one morning, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands buried in the cold soil. She was planting something, seeds from a crumpled paper pouch he hadn't even known she had. "Turnips," she said without looking up. "They don't need much. Just a chance." He stood a while, watching her press the dirt flat with the heel of her palm. She did it slow, like she meant it. "You didn't ask," he said. She glanced up, squinting into the light. "Didn't think I needed to." Samuel let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "You didn't." Clem had grown steadier. He whittled now little birds, crooked knives, anything he could shape with his pocket blade. Most of them he gave to Ella, though she was too young to do anything but gum at the edges. He talked more, too. About the land, about things he missed. And one afternoon, while feeding the mule, he asked Samuel if he might stay for good. Samuel only nodded and said, "If you want to, this is home." That night after supper, Annie sat by the fire, brushing Ella's hair with her fingers. "I was going to leave," she said. Samuel looked up from the map he'd been marking for spring planting. "When? After the thaw. Once I could walk the road without freezing. I didn't want to stay where I didn't belong." "You belonged the day you stepped off that train." She studied him. Her eyes, once clouded with the weight of too many silent days, held something clearer now. "Why didn't you tell me?" Samuel shifted. "Wasn't mine to decide. You needed to choose it." She nodded. "I think I did. Somewhere between the fence line and the turnips." Ella laughed, then a real bright laugh, and Annie smiled for the first time that month. A slow, unsure smile, but one that stayed. Later, after Clem had fallen asleep, curled around his pile of wood shavings, and the fire had gone down to embers, Annie stood in the doorway. The wind tugged at her hem. Her hair, loose, now moved like grass in the breeze. Samuel stepped beside her. "You ever think about leaving again?" he asked. She was quiet a long time. "No," she said. "I think about what it means to stay." Samuel swallowed. His hand brushed against hers. Not on purpose, not quite. But neither of them moved away. "I've got some land," he said. "Too much for one man." "I've got a baby and a brother," she answered. "Too much for one girl." They stood in the doorway as the moon climbed higher, casting silver on the porch rail, the field, the old wagon that still leaned left. And between them the night held still, a gentle stillness, the kind that doesn't ask for anything but presence. In the dark, Samuel turned to her. "If you stay," he said, "we could plant more than turnips." Annie nodded. "Then we'll need more pouches." It wasn't a promise, not quite, but it was something close. And it was enough. Spring settled in like a careful hand, slow, soft, but sure. The wind no longer cut, just carried. The days stretched out, stitched together with the work of living, tending, soil mending, fence wiping, noses feeding mouths. The kind of life that didn't make noise but filled the days all the same. By mid-April, the turnips had come up in tidy rows. Annie added carrots, then beans. Samuel cleared out a corner of the pasture for squash. Clem kept Ella close in a flour sack slung across his shoulder like a papoose proud of his job as second boss. She drooled all over the wood toys he made her, and they both seemed content with that arrangement. The rhythm changed, but never all at once. It came in little ways. Samuel started drinking his coffee inside instead of on the porch where he used to sit alone. Annie made biscuits without being asked. Sometimes they talked while she kneaded dough about nothing important. The weather, the creek rising, which cow looked likely to calve first, but it felt like something was being built between the words. Some nights after Clem had gone to sleep and Ella had settled, Annie and Samuel sat on the porch in silence. And in that silence something grew, not loud, not fast, but deep. Then came the letter. It arrived by way of a drifter passing through, handed off with a shrug and a muttered fella back east said it was important. Samuel read it twice, then a third time. His hands shook, not from fear but from the thing he'd buried long ago and now couldn't keep down. It was from his brother. Hadn't seen him since before the war. Thought he was dead. Turned out he wasn't. He was living in Kansas, sick now, real sick. Wanted to make things right, or at least say goodbye. That night Samuel sat outside long after the fire died, letter clenched in his hand like it might disappear if he let go. Annie stepped out, arms wrapped tight around her shawl. "Bad news?" she asked. He shook his head. "Old news. Trying to come back to life." She waited. He handed her the letter. When she finished reading, she looked up at him, her voice steady. "You going?" "I should." "You want to?" "I don't want to leave here." Annie looked out over the dark fields. The chickens rustled in their coop. A coyote cried far off, sharp and distant. "I didn't stay here just to be safe," she said. "I stayed because you felt like the beginning of something." Samuel felt the words settle into him, heavy and warm. "You think it'll still be here when I get back?" he asked. She didn't smile. She just stepped closer, laid her hand on his chest. "If you come back, so will I." The next morning she packed him bread and jerky and stitched the rip in his coat. Clem hugged him hard, then tried to pretend he hadn't. Ella reached for his beard and tugged until he laughed. Before he climbed on the wagon, he looked at Annie. "If I don't make it back, you will. But if I don't, I'll keep the garden growing," she said. "I'll teach Clem to run a plow straight, and I'll tell Ella about the man who made room for us when he didn't have to." He nodded, climbed up, clicked the reins. As the wagon rolled down the road, he looked back once. She was still standing there, arms around the baby, hair pulled loose by the wind. No tears, no waving, just a woman watching something go, believing it might come back. And he would. He didn't know when, didn't know how long the road would pull him. But he would come back, because the house was no longer just his, because the garden had turned green, because she had stayed. Another chapter rides in with the wind. Subscribe.